In the closing months of World War II, Taipei was in ruins. A massive Allied bombing raid had ravaged the city at the end of May 1945. Even now, 8 decades later, some who witnessed the attacks still remember them vividly.
迄倒位来，迄阵我才15啦，岁囝尔，我是毋知影。我才会听讲，才会迄当阵，才会讲是美国的飞行机也有人安尼讲，啊嘛个事实都嘛毋知，迄飞行机拢足大台，讲是229的。迄砰砰叫规个安尼耳孔安尼强要破去安尼。 敢若听到迄个声哦，你心就做就焦就艰苦，啊囡仔行较好，甲爬叫，迄心肝就安尼足艰苦足乱的啊。
The raid would prove to be the largest to hit Taiwan during the war, killing an estimated 3,000 people in a single day. 80 years ago, this building that you can see behind me, the presidential office building, would have been in flames. It burned for 3 days after the bombing and wasn't fully repaired until the late 1940s. Now, just north of here, Taipei Rail Station, a key transportation hub, was also hit. Taipei's central government district suffered the worst of the damage. The area that's now 228 Peace Memorial Park was heavily cratered, and the nearby Bank of Taiwan lost its roof. The bombings didn't spare important centers of Taiwanese religious life. Longshan Temple, a longtime symbol of local identity, was burned to the ground in the raids. Local legend has it that this temple, then made out of wood, was used to store weapons during the war, and that all but its statue of Guanyin, the bodhisattva of compassion, was destroyed in blazes caused by the bombings. So is it true? Well, sources seem to differ. But what is certain is that the persistence of this story in Taiwan is exceptional, because for the most part, the country seems to have forgotten the bombings. Despite the scale of destruction, the 1945 raid has largely faded from public memory. The raid is barely commemorated in Taipei, and unlike bombings in Tokyo, Dresden, or London, almost unknown abroad.
The bombing of Taipei and other areas is, of course, horrific, and several thousand die, but it's just several thousand. So it pales in comparison to the 150,000 or so that happened in March of 1945 with the Tokyo air bombing. So for all intents and purposes, Taiwan gets away relatively unscathed.
The raid was just one part of a much larger conflict unfolding across the Pacific. Taiwan's strategic importance had diminished by 1944 through 45, especially as Japan's naval and merchant fleets were decimated by Allied attacks, making the island less critical as a base for shipping and supply lines.
I think it's fair to say that the island of Taiwan itself was not a primary part of either the Allied or the Japanese strategy in terms of the overall war. Clearly, it was geographically well located, remains so, just a few hundred miles off the coast of China. But that said, most of the land-based warfare, which involved essentially the Japanese sending many troops on the peninsula through Korea, became more concentrated in Japanese mind.
There's also the question of Cold War political narrative. Taiwan was part of the Japanese Empire from 1895 until 1945. Many of those killed in the raid were technically Japanese subjects, seen as legitimate targets by the Republic of China, which has ruled Taiwan since 1945, but during the war was fighting a bitter battle with Japan on the Chinese mainland.
Carries the war to Japan. A dozen big Chinese bombers twice raided 3 cities on the island of Formosa, spreading death and terror among the inhabitants of the former Chinese possession.
Death comes from the clear blue sky, just as it has come to thousands of our innocent people throughout the length and breadth of our land.
After the war, Chinese nationalists wanted to build a new national identity for Taiwan, with China at its core. And that did not include Taiwanese people fighting for Japan or dying under American and Chinese bombs.
The bombing of Taiwan pretty much kind of gets subsumed in the rest of the imperial era of Taiwanese history because it's about Taiwan that was part of the Japanese Empire and Taiwan that fought for Japan, and that can't be part of the KMT story.
Heroes Day, and through the streets of Taipei, a martial parade symbolic of the fighting spirit of nationalist China's army in the fortress island of Formosa.
How could the Taiwanese have been bombed by the Americans? They're supposed to be Chinese allies. It doesn't fit the KMT narrative that they want to hoist on this former colony. And so pretty much all of that wartime history is put into the dustbin of history, where it has to wait until the 1990s to come out.
While official histories ignored their suffering, the survivors lived through a harsh and uncertain post-war reality.
迄句早无抑搁较无通食，讲好了迄句抑搁较乱，凭日本伫落抑较乱，日本伫落伊抑过配一个互你食，是互你安尼干那讲张袂肥五袂死，无嘛抑有看到美了。
The Taipei raid remains the second deadliest event in the city's history, surpassed only by the February 28th incident 2.5 years later. But unlike that crackdown on anti-government protesters, there are no public memorials to the bombings. As fears of renewed conflict in the Taiwan Strait generate global headlines, the raid stands as a stark reminder of the consequences of the war. One many are content to forget. Ryan Wu, Ed Moon, Jeffrey Chen, and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.